Guys, you're going to think I'm wacky for this idea, but it's something I've been doing for a long time. It saves me some money, it preserves my baits, makes them last longer, and really provides me with better hookups on fish. And this tip has to do with wacky rigs. And you know, there's a lot of discussion about how do you rig a wacky rig? What's the proper way? And you've got people who are kind of adamant on both sides. And I don't know that there is specifically a right or wrong reason. I can tell you in this case that I've got personal experience that makes me want to rig my wacky rigs in a specific way. So in this case, I've got my Berkeley General, and you know what I'm talking about. You've got multiple different ways to hook a wacky rig. Lots of different types of hooks. You know, I prefer either a weighted wacky rig, like these are some Fusion 19 Berkeley hooks, or just some wide gap like short shank hooks. You know, I'm not a huge fan of putting a giant hook in my wacky rig, but that's a whole nother discussion. So in this case, if I take one of these weighted wacky rigs, there are pretty much two ways that people say you should rig a wacky rig. One being, if you just hook it straight through, then you've got your hook perpendicular to the worm. And to me, that's how you want to have the hook. You want to have it perpendicular to the worm. And the reason for that is if I use an O-ring and I put it down towards like the egg sac of the worm, and then hook right through the O-ring, and you have a setup like that. Pretty much is what it is. The issue I have with a parallel hook shank to the worm is frequently I'll make a cast and I'll bring my bait back, and the side of the worm that's closest to the tip of the point will get stuck on the hook point like that. This happens a lot. And a lot of times when I miss fish with a wacky rig, it's because of that worm wrapped back around and caught itself on the hook. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen a cruising fish, I throw the bait up there, fish swims over, sucks it in, I set the hook, I miss the fish, and it comes back looking like this. And it's all because that tail came back. The majority of the time when I have that happen, it's if I'm using an O-ring, it's always the side of the worm that catches that hook. When I rig it so that the hook is perpendicular to the worm, I don't get that the tails don't get caught nearly as much. And I don't know specifically why it is. You know, has something to do with the physics where the worm just doesn't catch itself when the hook is past the worm. You know, when it's straight in line, if that worm comes back, it's going to catch the hook. If it's perpendicular, it does not happen as much. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen as much. So in my mind, that's the best way to rig a wacky worm. The problem with this is you've got no real good way to keep that worm on the hook. You go through a lot more worms. And, you know, if you're catching a lot of fish, you can go through bags and bags of plastics, and it just really is something that can become costly. Whereas compared to if you're using an O-ring and you have the hook parallel, you will catch a lot of fish with one bait, because that O-ring is keeping that hook on, or that bait on your hook, or in a lot of cases it slides up the line, and you save the bait. So, you know, in the best of both worlds would be you can keep the bait on your line and catch more fish, but you can hook it so that the hook shank is perpendicular to the bait. And I've got a way to do that. And this is my tip for you. You know, I haven't seen anyone talk about this. I don't know if people do this. This is something that I've been doing for a while now, and I feel like I get the best of both worlds. I can keep my baits, my baits for longer. I catch more fish, and at the same time, I feel like my hookups percentage is, you know, as high as it can be with a Wacky rig. So this is how I do it. So you need a couple of things. First, a nice sharp pair of scissors. And what I do is I go into the worm where I would put a O-ring, where I want my hook to be. And I'll cut not all the way through it, but I'll go almost, you know, probably 2/3 of the way through, and I'll just make a simple cut. As you can see, you know, I'm not all the way through it, but it's definitely in it. Then what I do is you want to insert something into the worm that you can hook through. Now what I do is I make these little discs. I don't know if you can see them. It's just a little tiny clear disc. And I do that by taking old Tupperware and a hole punch. And as you can see, I've cut some holes. I mean, you literally just take your hole punch and you make some holes. And what you'll get, and they blend in so they're hard to see, you know, is a lot of these little perfect little plastic discs. You then take that plastic disc and you insert it into where you cut the worm. And this one does not want to go in. And if it doesn't fit, you just cut a little deeper into the worm. This one really does not want to go in. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that. You can see just the very little tip of that disc is sticking out right here. So it's inserted into the worm. Then you take your Wacky rig and you're just going to hook it perpendicular to the worm, but you're going to go through the center of that disc. And when it goes through, it'll pop through just like that. And you can see just a little bit of the disc is sticking out. I'm really doing that so you can kind of see it more than anything. I like to have that disc all the way in the worm normally. But what that does, now when you're pulling on that worm, you're dispersing the pressure throughout the worm, which creates a greater area of resistance for that worm, leading to less tearing in you know, that right where that hook shank is. At the same time, it keeps your worm really nicely in place, so it doesn't slide up and down, because really the pressure from the hook in the worm is on the plastic disc, and that's going to let you it's going to keep you from going through as many worms. It's just one of those things where it's all about keeping your worm from moving a ton, because the more friction that goes back and forth, all it's doing is tearing your worm. So by adding that little disc, you're spreading out that force that you create when you cast your worm or when a fish bites it, and it's just keeping that worm in better condition, which is going to lead to it not falling off the hook as much as you would if you were just hooking it with your hook. And what I like to do, you know, you saw it took me a few seconds to get it rigged and prepped. I do all this ahead of time. So I'll take a bag of worms and I'll cut my little discs, I'll insert them into the worm, and have them ready to go come tournament time. So I don't have to deal with, you know, doing these little things. This is another little chore that I do during the winter, and I've probably got, I don't know. I mean, I pretty much every general I have right now has a disc in it. If you know, if you're one of those people that likes to make sure that your worm is in, you know, perfect shape, you can take a little bit of like mended glue and put a dab on it just to close that hole up. I don't find that that makes a difference in terms of keeping your worm from falling off the hook. I think it potentially creates a little bit better appearance. But again, I don't know that that matters so much. You know, when the disc is inserted down, in this case, I mean, it's sticking out maybe a 1/16 of an inch and it's clear. I don't think that matters personally. If you wanted to make sure it was sealed down inside the worm, put a dab of mended on and you'll be good to go. But, you know, this is a little tip that I've been doing for years and I've never heard of anyone do it. I can tell you it works really well. It will allow you to get better hookups. You won't get as many times where the worm tangles with your hook because the hook's not parallel to the worm that you would have if you're using an O-ring. And I just feel like it gives you the best of both worlds. So give it a try, guys. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. You know, I'd love to get some feedback. I think there's probably a lot of other pieces that you could put in the worm to do a good job at holding it. You know, I've tried other things. I've inserted paper clips. I've done things like that just to play around with the worm. I personally haven't found anything as good as a nice, you know, thin piece of, you know, plastic like these. It just seems like it allows you to get the hook through it easily, and it holds the hook and it fits in the worm nice. But like I said, I'd be interested to hearing, you know, if you guys try it and you find some other items that work, let me know. Otherwise, guys, if you enjoy the tip, like, share, subscribe. You know, I got a lot more tips coming, and I'm hoping that they're catching you guys a few more fish. Thanks for watching.